I am Jean Schumacher, founder of the Plant-Based Academy, where I provide help, support, guidance, and resources to switch to a plant-based lifestyle and get your health back. Today, I have the privilege of connecting with Cathy Katin-Grazzini, who's a plant-based chef. She is the author of the cookbook, Love the Foods That Love You Back, and now she's introducing her latest book, Love the Foods That Love the Planet. And this is where she explains how we can eat both for our health and to cool the planet. In addition to developing healthy, climate-friendly recipes around the world, Cathy is a culinary instructor and teaches about environmental and nutritional impacts. Tonight, she is making asparagus recoup soup and some croutons that are going to go on top. So, Cathy, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me here tonight.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Jean.
Always a treat with you. So I'm just going to turn this right over to you. Take it away.
Okay. All right. Well, what I'm going to show you tonight are easy recipes because our lives are busy and we want nourishment, we want delicious, we want beautiful, but we don't always, have a lot of time. And so this is one recipe that will work. It comes from the new cookbook. So it's got recipes from all over the world and makes a really pretty holiday treat. I call this recipe asparagus recoup soup because the focus of the cookbook is eating for the planet, how we can eat healthy, super healthy, but at the same time, luckily, we can also really significantly slash our individual climate footprint, the amount of greenhouse gases that we all generate in our own kitchens, in our own homes. And we do that with food. We can, if we're eating plant-based, but sustainably grown, unprocessed plant-based foods, because not all of them are. If we really do that 100%, we can slash that footprint by 75%. It's stunning compared to someone who's eating, let's say, a burger a day. That comparison, that was out of a study out of Oxford just last year. So in the cookbook, I highlight all sorts of really eco-friendly recipes, but in addition, I give a lot of hints for home cooks about how to reduce food waste in the kitchen, because it's an enormous problem and it's part of why greenhouse gas emissions are a third of total greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted everywhere globally. 1/3 comes from our food, and in that food, 1/3 of that is wasted. In fact, it's from 1/3 to 50%. I just saw another statistic today. That's everywhere along the supply chain, from where it's grown or raised and, all the way to waste treatment centers. And every stage along the supply chain, food is wasted and lost, and it's a shame. And so we can just be more mindful, and I have a lot of recipes, but also hints for the home cook. Learn how to be creative with cooking and pay attention to how we're using our food or wasting it, letting it spoil, buying too much and not eating it, or just we have scraps and parts of things that we don't know what to do with. So they either, if we have a garden, maybe they go in the compost, but if we don't, they end up in the garbage and they contribute to the problem. So asparagus recoup soup is a soup that is made just with the woody ends of asparagus. So those parts that we, might break off and we're steaming or braising, or not braising, well, maybe braising, but blanching or cooking the spears, but the lower wooded part, which is sometimes not pleasant to eat, it needs a lot more cooking than the tops. Those are typically people do break them off and waste them. So this is a way to make a really beautiful, luscious, creamy blended soup that's so delicate and so wonderful. It's really surprising to do that out of these woody ends of the asparagus, but it turns out you can. So I'm going to show you how to make that. And I think we'll have enough time while this is cooking to also make a little garnish for the soup. I'm going to cook these little woody ends it could take 5 minutes if they're the thin asparagus. It could take up to 20 minutes if it's thicker ones. And these are a little bit larger. So we'll just keep an eye on them. And when they're very tender, we'll fish them out and let them cool down just a teeny bit. And then we'll put them in the blender with just a couple of seasonings, very few, very little, because the beauty of this soup, it's got such floral, delicate flavor notes. I don't really want to obscure that with a lot of heavy seasoning. It doesn't need it. It's really delightful just without it.
How did you come up with this idea? Most people just put out a cookbook. What was your motivation?
The climate has been really plaguing me, keeping me up at night for several years now, as I witness, as we all have, all these horrific extreme weather events all over the world. Do so many recipes that are inspired by home cooking traditions from all over the world. You'll find recipes from Japan and Denmark and West Africa, Latin America, and all over, because they're so ingenious and they're so simple, just the simple fruits of the earth that home cooks have been using, what they grow and what they forage and what's in their environs for millennia. This is peasant eating, the healthiest thing for our bodies because it's so unprocessed and natural and diversified. Eating wide on the plant-based kingdom, just the best thing we can do for our microbiomes. It just brings down inflammation and keeps us as healthy as we can be with food. So when I've been witnessing all the tragedies and how it's impacted all the farming communities everywhere, and watching as temperatures annually keep breaking records, I didn't understand the issue well enough. It's so complex from the outside. I really wanted to try to educate myself. And so that's what got me into just undertaking, for my own edification, the study, so I could read some of the studies, read some of the books, try to familiarize myself with the terminology. I'm not a climate scientist, I don't pretend to be, but there's a ton of information that one can just absorb that's available. And when I did that, I discovered, to my amazement, that actually food has a huge impact on the climate and vice versa. And what we eat specifically really matters in terms of the impact that we as individuals and collectively have on the climate as well. And I had so many myths that I went into this with, expectations, things I thought I understood, and it turned out no, on many accounts I was really surprised that what I thought was true or what I thought was important turned out not to be at all, because the planet really needs us. It's careening to really dangerous spot right now. In the coming decade, if it continues to heat this way, there are going to be really devastating consequences. If we think what we're experiencing now, here in Connecticut, where I am, we're in drought, and there are fire warnings, for wildfires. It's something I never expected, never experienced in all my 30 years of living here. And it's just the beginning. So things will escalate even more devastatingly if we don't begin to bend the curve. And a lot of things are happening, just can't happen quickly enough. And that's where all of us should and must play a role to help buy us more time, so to get the transition away from fossil fuels so we can really have a green economy.
We all need to do our part, but I think if everybody went plant-based, my God, we could really have a huge impact. So
it would be so major. I wish I had the statistics in my head to share with you, but if the world, if we did that, so much of agriculture is devoted to animal agriculture, for one thing. 3/4 of the emissions come from that alone, of the food emissions. It's responsible for so much habitat loss. There's a terrible crisis going on with wildlife that people are not aware of either. Biodiversity goes hand in hand with climate change, and the food industry, because of deforestation and the draining of wetlands, and we're losing our natural world. Only 6% of mammals, for example, are wild. 6%. 94% of what exists today is all livestock. There's an index called the Living Planet Index, put together by the WWF. They put together this index where they look at 40,000+ species. The upshot is that there have been population declines, not extinctions, but the declines in populations. I forget, over how many species, but just an enormous number, has been 73% since 1970. That doesn't mean that they're extinct. It doesn't mean that but it means, and some populations have improved but the ones that have gone down so egregiously that the average of all of them across all vertebrate species that they looked at is a 73% decline since 1970. Extinctions, the numbers are just terrible. They're all going up across all of trees, animals. The whole planet is suffering. It's all driven by our development and fossil fuels that are overheating the climate, loss of habitat. Yeah, the planet is really hurting. So for the croutons, you don't have to go through this little recipe to make croutons. What's traditionally used is just stale bread. I just don't happen to have any right now. And I thought, well, might happen to other people too. Maybe you'd like to have an alternative idea when you're making any kind of soup, that if you want a little bit of a crunch or a little bit of a texture, these croutons are not stale bread, so their texture is going to be different, but it's like a delightful little crispy on the outside, a little tender on the inside, a little something to put on top of this very simple soup. I'm going to be using, in keeping with our theme tonight of eating for the planet, in the recipe, which is in the cookbook, I talk about whole wheat or whole grain, and if you don't want to use wheat, but breadcrumbs. So it depends what you're making your bread out of, which are easy to make if you have bread and if it's not stale. Our bread doesn't tend to get stale the way some European breads get so stale, they're like a rock. In Italy, in Florence, that is the way their bread rolls there. And so it's very easy to make croutons, and you just rub them with a little raw garlic, sprinkle some herbs on top, and it makes a very pleasant crouton. You could also slice your bread if it's still rather fresh and bake it until it becomes very crispy. You have to make sure it's really crispy, and then do the same. But if you don't have bread, here's an alternative. And instead of breadcrumbs, what I happen to be accumulating, so this is one way to be creative about repurposing ingredients that normally we just toss because we don't know what to do with it and we don't think about it. And this is, every so often we don't eat a lot of cold cereal, but when we do, shredded wheat is sometimes what we have had. And in the bottom of, I love this particular shredded wheat. It's just from Stop and Shop, but it's very coarse. It's very crunchy, and it doesn't get soggy in your plant-based milk. You often have crumbs that remain in the bottom of the bag that people just throw away. But I decided to accumulate them and use them somehow. So here are my shredded crumbs. I'm going to see, I haven't done this before, so you guys are a little bit guinea pigs, and we'll see how it works out. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? But breadcrumbs certainly work. So the recipe in the cookbook worked. And we'll see if these slightly coarser little shreds here can do the trick. So I have, let's see, it's about 2/3 a cup, I believe. And what else is going to be going in here? Let's just see. I have a little granulated garlic. We're just going to flavor this up a little bit. Little granulated, or it's actually onion powder at this point. Just a bit, I think it's a teaspoon of nutritional yeast. I have a little arrowroot that's going to help us bind it. I have some herbes de Provence, and you could use any dried herb that you like, just to give a little flavor and, aroma. And then I have just, I forget how much, not even a teaspoon. Maybe it's a teaspoon. It looks a little scant, but it's a little bit of shiro miso, just a bit to give it a little flavor. And so that's what's going to go in there. I'm just going to combine this right now. The miso, I'll just try to mush around until it kind of distributes. And the only other thing that's going to be going in our mix is this potato. And that's going to help us make a bit of a dough. I'm going to roll out the dough. It's not going to be very big. Slice it up, and then I just toast it in a nonstick pan. See if this is soft enough. I'm just going to use a ricer. I'm going to cut it in half. I like it very soft because it can be hard to push them through a potato ricer if they're not. They still have their skin on and everything. So let's see. And you have to do this while the potato is pretty steamy still. See how much I could get out there. I'm going to use most of this potato. I won't squeeze it to the nth because I might not need it to be, I just want to use the potato so that just a little bit of the skin. Oops. Just remove the skin there. And I'm going to not squeeze the second half. I'll use half of it for now. I might add more, but we'll see. We'll see if we need to. Because it's pretty steamy, I'm just going to use a fork. I want it to begin to feel like a dough that will hold together. And I might need a little more potato to do that, but we pull out the stops for Thanksgiving. That is true.
We do. And one of the other things I'm going to make is an Indian corn pudding. We have a grist mill that is here in my town in Brewster. And before they shut down the grist mill for the season, goes back to, I don't know what, the 1800s, this grist mill, and it's still running, same time, same channel. So I went there and bought like 4 bags. They grind it right in front of you. It's organic corn.
What a resource.
It is, and it's wonderful. And one of the things they did is they gave out this whole pamphlet of recipes. So of course I had to go and plantize them. So I made Indian corn pudding, which was absolutely out of this world. I think I knocked the recipe out of the park, plantizing it. So making that and, adding some nice cream to it. Oh, because I remember back in the day, there was a restaurant in Boston called Durgam Park, and talk about traditional American cooking. Oh my gosh. And it was a very famous restaurant. I mean, to the point where, the waitresses had been there for forever. I think they came over on the Mayflower, and there are these big burly things that were, serving you. And yeah, there was no reservations. The place had like bare light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. And, it was just, you weren't there for the atmosphere. You were there for the food because it was phenomenal. It was traditionally made, old fashioned recipes, from Civil War days or pre-Civil War Revolution days. I don't know, but long time ago. So the rest
That sounds amazing. What a wonderful thing to do for Thanksgiving.
So that's one of the things I'm doing. And I still remember when the first time I had ever tried Indian corn pudding, I went, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And the restaurant took 2 days to cook it. It's an incredible, I mean, slow cooker kind of thing. And
wow.
So it's
that sounds just what an experience. That
yeah.
sounds just phenomenal. How many people come to your party, to the celebration?
I would say there's like 10, 12, something like that. So it's just so much fun.
That's really, really lovely. Boy.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's no questions, like, oh my God, did somebody put oil in this? Did somebody, is there animal products? No. Or having to bring your own food. Because we all know, bring, it's kind of a potluck kind of thing. So it's really, it's fabulous. So it's a lot of fun. Well, what's great, I think, about Thanksgiving is that a lot of the recipes that you make, apart from turkey, I get it, but a lot of the recipes you make, you can easily plantize. So that's
I agree. So the shredded wheat, it's really wonderful looking. Its consistency is a little bit different than breadcrumbs. I think it's a little drier. It absorbed a little more of the potato. So I added, you might have seen, I added just a teaspoon, not even maybe a teaspoon. This is a little espresso spoon. I added two of those just for a little extra moisture. It's not sticking or anything like that. It is more coarse, and I'm just gonna roll it with my Indian rolling pin here to about 1/4 of an inch high. The asparagus you want them really tender. You want them really tender for the blender to really, because otherwise you'll get in the woody ends can be stringy. You don't want any of that. You want that all to sort of disappear into creamy wonderfulness. It's a very velvety soup, the texture, and fragrant, and that's what we're shooting for. So better to cook it longer till you get that, I mean, it won't dissolve, but you want to make sure it's thoroughly cooked before we put it in the blender. But I'm just using a little straight edge here to square off my corners because we'll make a slightly nicer looking crouton, even if I have to roll it again a little. And I've done this with breadcrumbs. It can be a little more softer, but I have a feeling this might be even tastier and a little crunchier, like you want a crouton to be. So, and it's not a lot of croutons that we're making here, just for. And if what we're not using, if this soup is enough, this is from 2 pounds, 2¼ pounds of asparagus. It's not 2¼ ends. It's the spear and everything was about two bunches, and each one is a little bit more than a pound. And it's enough to really serve 2 people if you're eating it for dinner. But it depends, you might be able to use it for more people. It doesn't make a huge amount, but you could always double up the recipe or make more if you're having more people. And croutons, you may use them all because they're fun just to nibble on, or you can just refrigerate them or freeze them and just reheat them so they crisp up before you do use them next time.
Talk to us about your pans. You say you have a nonstick pan. What kind of pans do you have?
I remember we talked about pans last time, so you can definitely, I'm interested to try your pan. I don't use my nonstick pans. I hardly ever use them. It's only when I'm doing something with either a batter or something that, I'm just concerned it would stick otherwise. These are from Finland, I think. These are scan pans. And they're nice, but I don't know if I'd be buying them today. I remember the Swiss diamond that you had talked about. So why don't you tell everybody about that? Because I think that's even probably a superior pan.
Well, the scan pans, I have several friends who are using the scan pans as well. And again, those are made in Europe, and Europe has very different regulations than they do here in the United States. So one of the wonderful things is that they have to prove, it's called the precautionary principle. You have to prove before you can release something that it's not going to be toxic to humans. Whereas in the United States, anything goes. So that's kind of one of the things I like about, European products like that. I use Swiss Diamond, and I have quite a few. Like, for example, they have a griddle. I don't have one, I have 2 griddles. Because they're like square griddles that you can put on a single burner. So when I'm making pancakes, you're trying to make a bunch of pancakes, usually I make that as a special treat, for when we have company over or whatever. So you're trying to make a lot of pancakes quickly. So I have the 2 griddles going at the same time. So it's almost at the point where you can take the griddle and flip it up and the pancakes will flip over. I mean, that's how nice they are.
I mean, yeah. I mean, the scan pan works well, but it doesn't work like that. And I find with the scan pans, now I've had this for a little while. I don't use it very much. Eventually I will replace it, and then I might try something else. I find that these are good for up to 500 degrees. It's fairly high. You want to make sure with your whatever pan nonstick that you're using.
I have to say, I've been using the Swiss Diamond for about 8 years, and I still have the same pans. and the surface is still just as good
Yeah,
as it was.
that's amazing to me.
Yeah.
So that's really impressive.
So I do have a Amazon storefront, so I'm just going to put that in the chat. So if you can use that, the storefront, if you're purchasing anything, there's a lot of products that people ask me, like, what B12 do you use? What pans do you use? Whatever. So I kind of made a big, I made folders for all the different things like pots and pans or food or spices, things like that. So you can check that out, and it doesn't cost you anything, but it certainly, I'm not going to retire anytime soon on this, I think the first month I made $8. It's like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna retire on anytime soon. But any kind of money helps to go for the plant-based free academy. So you guys get it for free, but I still have to pay for it. So any support you guys can do, that would be amazing to help.
That sounds great.
Talk to us about what you're doing.
Oh, so I'm just cutting little squares. You can make them rectangular, whatever shape you want, just cutting them out. You see, it's nice. They don't stick, they roll. It took a little while to flatten them out. I'm just going to toast them up. They should only take a couple of minutes on each side. If I might have it on too low a flame, but I'll give them a couple of minutes. I want them to just brown up. And I mean, there's nothing raw in here. It's not for a health thing. It's just for aesthetics, really. And just to crisp them up. So let's see how they come out. The herbs are wonderful, though. It just smells great. Let me see how my little asparagus are doing. I'm just going to take them out so they can cool off a little bit before I don't want to put them in this hot into my blender. And then we're almost done. So once the croutons crisp up and we blend up the soup, and I'll add my seasonings to the soup. I'll show you what I'm going to season them with. And we're going to save the liquid here because we'll need some of that to blend this into a soup. Not all of it. I'll just go slowly. And you can, this is your discretion. It's like, what consistency do you want this soup to have? I like it to be sort of dense and creamy.
Well, I just love the idea of using the shredded wheat, because my husband eats that, and literally the bottom of the bag is like 1/3 of the shredded wheat.
I know,
So
it's
brittle.
insane.
And then what do you do with that? Because it's like, you don't want, you're like trying to eat this, and it's like, yeah, no, it's like this mush. So this is brilliant.
So this is just one way to use them. You could put them in if you're making crepes, it would affect the texture a little bit, but especially you could make them finer. If you don't want them this coarse, you can plop them in a food processor and just zip it, pulse it once or twice to make them a little more, reasonable. I wanted the texture for this because they should be crunchy. You can use them in crackers. Like in my Love the Foods That Love You Back is my first cookbook that has classic whole food, plant-based, no oil, no salt, no sugar recipes. That's where the pasta recipe was, and gnocchi and all sorts of things, bread making, but they're amazing recipes. And the new cookbook too, just a little bit different. I'm gonna just flip these guys over. I'll show you. Oops. Yeah, they're browning up nicely now. So these guys are almost done. Let's get them. Oops. And it's fun. It makes you feel good, not to waste things. Just show you. I mean, I'm toasting the other side of them, but just to give you a close-up is, this is sort of the color. You want them golden on both sides. And they'll be a little softer on the inside. The flatter you make them, the crispier they'll be, but I kind of like them having, a couple of different things going on. Crispy on the outside and a little softer on the inside. I'm gonna start with, you could always add more. I don't want to add too much, but I probably will need more. I'm just going to add about a ladle. And also I'm going to add a little bit of, this is white pepper, because it's just a couple of grinds. White pepper because it disappears in the soup. I don't want little dark specks on, to muddy things up. Little bit of nutritional yeast, but very little. And I have a little shiro miso that I've diluted in water. So it's just a little softened miso. I mean, you could also not dilute it and just add a little more of the liquid. It's all the same. Okay, and that's it. So no herbs, no other things, because the asparagus itself has such floral, delicate notes. You don't want to muddy that up. You don't want to obscure it. It would be different. Now, I should say this is asparagus, but the same technique as we just did here would also work for broccoli stems, cauliflower stems, the cores of cabbage, the stems of collards or kale, or any of the scraps of vegetables. Those are more assertive in flavor. They're not delicate and floral the way asparagus is, but they're delicious and super healthy. And you can season them similarly, or you might want to, they're bolder flavors. You might want to, with broccoli, add some chili and make it a little more lively, or with cauliflower, nutmeg goes very nicely. You might play with different things, or there you might add some herbs and spices, depending on if you want to give it a South Asian flavor or Mexican, or just to mix it up a little bit to give it a little more character. But they're all recoupable. That's what I want to leave you with. So really break it up. So it looks good, but tasting is what you need to do. And also, this is a way to correct your seasonings. Whenever you're cooking, cooking is such a sensual experience. You want to use your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, be really engaged and involved. You can judge by the look of something, by the aroma, but also we're going to taste it to see if we want to bump up any of these seasonings. It's just so nice. I'm happy. I don't think I would change anything, but this is me. Everybody's different, and you might like it with more, nutritional yeast or miso or something. But for me, this works. I have, of course, our croutons, but in addition, I think it's very pretty. Let me just chop these up. So I have some chives, fresh chives. I'm just going to use my mezzaluna. You could use a chef knife. It's a little tool. I don't know if you guys have it. It's called the mezzaluna. It's Italian for half moon because of the shape. And it's just, when I lived in Italy, this was every kitchen, of course, has a mezzaluna. People use it all the time. It is brilliant. It's just a sharp blade, a single blade for chopping garlic, ginger. You can make it takes seconds, and it herbs, mixing garlic with your parsley, which in many Italian dishes you do. And so you can chop them up together. I'll just show you. It's just, of course, let me just give it a first. You can do it. Normally, I don't do it this way, but because the chives have a mind of their own, they want to travel. But when you're doing anything else, you just use two hands. Yeah, once I get them smaller pieces, I can do that. And you can make it as fine as you want. And it takes literally, 30 seconds, if that. And it's just a really nice way to not crush your herbs, or even your aromatics like, ginger or garlic or lemongrass or whatever. You can control exactly the size of the pieces that you want. And it's sharp, so it's like a knife. The blade will not crush them, which is what you want, because oftentimes if you use any kind of mechanical device, it mushes them as opposed to getting nice clean cuts. But I'm just going to sprinkle some of the chives because they're so fragrant also, and they're very delicate. This is a little something, it's just pretty for the color, and it's a little bit of flavor. These are chili threads. They literally are little threads of finely sliced dried chilies. So they're not super hot, but I like to just squeeze them together and, they just make such a pretty little garnish.
So how did you come across? Did you make that yourself?
No, this is something, I think you need the right machinery to make something like that because they're so fine. They're like hair, I'm not sure exactly what chili they use. So this is our little supper, or at least our appetizer.
Yum.
Just a pretty little dish. This is a company dish as a first course. It looks so much more involved than it is. It's so, as you saw, it has hardly anything in it and takes no time to make. It's so fragrant and delicious. I wish I could feed you all and you could taste how good it is. And it's in the new cookbook. So along with a whole bunch of other really delicious and wonderful dishes that are so good for us and good for the Mother Earth as well. So I hope you enjoy it and I hope you had fun tonight too.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm very grateful. And thank everybody else for coming tonight.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And if you have any questions about this recipe, anything in the cookbook, or anything else, you can reach me at cathyskitchenprescription.com is my website, and there is a comments page with, you can ask questions. I try to get back to people the same day. Don't be a stranger.
Thank you, and good night, everybody. Good night, John Boy.